What is our lesson number, Teacher Michael?
Let me check, Miss Duck.
Is it 11?
Hey, 9,
Long time.
10,
Today
11. It looks like lesson 12 today.
Okay, thank you. Right?
No worries, thank you. So, actually, seeing as it is lesson 12, we've been doing this for 12 lessons now. We have covered a fair bit of material. So, does anyone have any questions, anything they'd like to go over or revise about what we've learned so far? Because we really have learned a lot about persuasive writing in these lessons. So does anyone have any topics that they'd like to revise, anything you'd like to go over, anything you're not sure about? "20 years later. Conan, it's been 2 minutes. Where did you learn to tell time?" Okay. So if no one has anything that they would like to revise, let's get on with it. So actually, just quickly, have we talked about, had a class on using evidence yet, or was our last lesson on creating strong arguments? So yeah, what was the topic of our number 1? Okay, good. So I'm on track here. Okay, so the first thing that we want to discuss, I'll bring up my whiteboard. Terrific. So I'll bring up my whiteboard here. And the first thing I want to talk to you about is, oh, not this arms stuff again, Kevin. Goodness gracious. The importance of using evidence. So, can anybody give me a reason why using evidence would be important? Why do we think it's important to use evidence in our persuasive writing? Don't mention it and he won't, Conan. So, who has an idea why it's important to use evidence? What about you, Bo? Stella? I think we should know this bit by now. So it's important to, yes, very good, Conan. Very good. So it is important to use evidence because it supports our argument. makes us more believable. Oop. Very good, Conan. Yeah, Kevin, cut it out, mate. Come on, enough. And something to consider is that an argument without evidence is just an opinion. So an opinion's fine for everyday conversation when you're talking to your friends and your family, nothing wrong with that. But if you're writing persuasively or you're participating in a debate or a speech or any really serious conversation, then we need to make sure that we have evidence to justify our arguments, and we don't want to be presenting opinions. So that's our first little tidbit for the day. So we always need evidence. Now, I know we've talked about this before, but can anyone tell me a type of evidence? What can we use as evidence to back up our arguments? Kevin?
Facts.
Very good. We can use facts. Good, good, good. Conan, do you have any ideas? How about you, Ken? Do you have any ideas about a type of evidence?
No,
Okay.
teacher.
No worries. How about you, Stella? Do you have an example of a type of evidence? Okay, I'll list another one. Statistics. So the reason that statistics, very good, depending on the type of conversation we need debates for. Yeah, real evidence, I'm thinking maybe like a video of something happening where you can see it. That might be a type of evidence you could use, but for persuasive writing, not so much. But statistics, let's say that I was writing an article on whether people think zoos are good for animals. I'm just going to pick a random debate topic. So let's say zoos good for animals. And let's say that I went super crazy on this and I managed to find the contact information for 100 of the best zoo experts in the world. So we've got 100 zoo experts. And I ask them all the same question. Do you think zoos are good for animals? And let's say that 87 of them said yes, and 13 of them said no. So this now gives me a statistic that I can use in my writing. I can then turn around and say, well, 87% of zoo experts or 87% of zoo experts contacted for this article, I should say, agreed that zoos are good for animals. Now you hear something like that, 87% is a big number. So that's going to really help with the believability of my argument. So does that make sense to everybody? Terrific. So another type of evidence that we can use, that's right, very good, Conan. So we could take evidence from a documentary, except if we were writing, we would have to describe it in our article or our whatever we're writing. So the next type of evidence is examples. So an example is just where you list off things that you can think of. So if I'm talking about, say, it's a good idea for children to play sport, I could then go off and list a whole bunch of sports that children can play. So I could say football, badminton, basketball. They're all examples. Or if you needed an example of a vegetable, I could say onion, carrot, potato. So an example is just, yeah, listing off things that you're talking about. We also have quotes. So a quote is if somebody has said something that would really help my case, I can write that into my speech or into my paper. And I just need to make sure that I say, Dr. Albert Einstein said, and then I can say, write the quote down. So always make sure to give credit when you list a quote. And finally, we have anecdotes. And an anecdote is just a personal story. So if something has happened to you that has to do with the topic you're writing about, you can use that personal story as evidence. So you can, yeah, so you can tell a story about the time that you went to the zoo and saw a veterinary team taking care of one of the animals because it was sick. So that's a personal story you could tell if that had happened. And because it's evidence, we always want to make sure that we're truthful. So don't make stories up just to try and prove your point. Always try and stick to true evidence, real evidence. Okay. So do we have any questions on, do we have any questions on the different types of evidence? Terrific. Okay. So the next thing that I would like to do, nope, excellent. Good. So the next thing I'd like to do is I just want us to have a look at a piece of writing. I'm going to find this link and I'm going to send it to you. And I want us all to read this article together. And we're going to look for some evidence. Okay. So we are going to read an article on the history of fireworks. Pew, pew. So actually, I'll share my screen instead. So here we go, the history of fireworks. So let's have a read through. We'll take it paragraph by paragraph. So it's not a very big article, but we can find some evidence in here. So our first paragraph, so we're just going to read this one here. Fireworks may seem like a very American tradition, especially on the 4th of July. But fireworks go back many years before the first American Independence Day celebration, which took place in 1777 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Can we see any evidence in this paragraph? There's not much. So there's just a couple of examples here. So like mentioning the 4th of July, apparently it's a very popular American tradition in some parts of the country to get your hands on as many fireworks as possible and just set them off in your backyard. So they've mentioned that here. And as well, they've given another example, or they've given a fact. So years before the first American Independence Day celebration, which took place 1777, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So there's just a little bit of evidence in that first paragraph. We now look at the second paragraph here. The earliest fireworks can be traced to around 2,000 years ago in China. People then are said to have roasted bamboo stalks. The stalks turned black and sizzled. The air inside the hollow stalks would explode. I hope I say this right. Baozhu is a Mandarin Chinese word for firecracker. It means exploding bamboo. So what would be our evidence in this paragraph? What would be our evidence in here? Somebody have a guess. Well, first of all, this first sentence, that's a fact. The earliest fireworks can be traced to around 2,000 years ago in China. So there's some evidence. then they go on to talk about people then are said to have roasted bamboo stalks. The stalks turned black and sizzled. The air inside the hollow stalks would explode. So this whole paragraph really is evidence. They're telling us the history of the fireworks. People then are said to have roasted bamboo stalks. They're just mentioning everything about the fireworks. So pretty much this whole paragraph is evidence. We then go on to our next paragraph. Someone else have a go, guys. Who's gonna point out some evidence for me? Years later, Chinese chemists took fireworks a step further. This happened sometime between 600 and 900 AD. People filled bamboo shoots with gunpowder. They threw them into a fire pit. Steel dust or iron shavings were added to make them sparkle. In China, these firecrackers were often used in celebrations. Kevin, where do you see some evidence?
I see the evidence in this happened sometime between the 600 and 900 AD.
Very good. So they're giving us this fact. They're telling us a fact when the fireworks were upgraded, I suppose. Stella.
I see at the end they said in China these firecrackers were often used in celebrations.
Very good. Another fact. They're telling us what these new firecrackers were used for. Bo, how about you? Ken, do you see any more evidence in this paragraph?
Yes, they threw them into a fire pit.
Very good. More examples, more facts. Good. Okay, so pretty much everything except for the first sentence can be considered evidence here because they're telling us the facts of what the people did, what they discovered that the Chinese did back then to make their fireworks. So people filled bamboo shoots with gunpowder. Steel dust or iron shavings were added to make them sparkle. So pretty much that entire paragraph is again evidence. This paragraph here. In the 13th century, fireworks spread to Europe. In the centuries that followed, Europeans began moving to North America. So it was no surprise that when 4th of July began to be celebrated as America's Independence Day, fireworks were part of the plan. Do we see any evidence in this paragraph? Stella.
I think that Europeans began moving to North America.
Very good. Oop, I'll just squiggle it right out. In the centuries that followed, Europeans began moving to North America. Good, more facts. Bo?
So I see is, so it was no surprise that when July 4th began to be celebrated as America's Independence Day.
Very good. So again, basically this whole paragraph is evidence. I'll just squiggle through it. Even that first sentence there. In the 13th century, fireworks spread to Europe. More facts, more information. Okay, next paragraph. John Adams was one of America's founding fathers. He said he hoped the anniversary of the country's independence would be marked for years to come by bonfires and illuminations. Where's our evidence? Stella.
John Adams was one of America's founding fathers.
Very good. Another fact. Any more evidence here? We've actually got a different form of evidence for this. Oh, goodness. We've actually got a different form of evidence for this sentence here. We've got a couple of quotes. You can see how they've used the quotation marks here. So whenever you see that just randomly used in a sentence, that's usually quoting somebody. So he said he hoped the anniversary of the country's independence would be marked 4 years to come by bonfires and illuminations. So those are the two things that John Adams said he hopes would mark the celebration. So they've quoted him by doing it like that. Again, here we go. Is there any evidence in these couple of sentences? Bo.
The first July 4th celebration happened during the middle of Revolutionary War.
Good. Evidence. So facts. We've also got cannons were fired and fireworks too marked the occasion. So just more evidence there, more facts, more examples of what happened. And in this last paragraph, do we see any evidence? Stella.
Today, fireworks are an established July 4th tradition.
Very good. Today, fireworks are an established July 4 tradition. Good. Another fact. And they're just asking a question on this end bit. So, will you see a fireworks display this Independence Day? So, not evidence, because they're asking you a question there. Okay. Well done, guys. Need to turn off my annotation. Well done, guys. Looking for evidence there. So, if we were to look through different forms of evidence, also different forms of persuasive writing, we would find different forms of evidence. So if we go back to the example of the movie trailers, what would the evidence be in those movie trailers for whatever they're trying to persuade you about to go and see that movie? What would be some of the evidence that they use in those movie trailers? Very good, Conan. The evidence in this, in those movie trailers would be examples. So the footage that they take from the movies to put into the trailers, that is your evidence, because it's showing you what is good about the movie, why you should go and see it. The music would actually be wouldn't be considered evidence, because that is just a persuasive device to get you excited. That just adds to the feeling of watching the trailer. Let me just check that chat. I see the point you're making, but if you notice in the trailer, at least this is my opinion on it, if you notice in the trailer that when they play the music and it builds up to its big dramatic crescendos and all the craziness happening, they tend to, excuse me. So they tend to, what am I trying to say? They tend to line that music up with the action happening in the trailer, whereas in the actual movies, the scores happen at different parts. So they may have taken music from the movie, like part of the music they wrote for the movie. They may have used that in the trailer, but they use it more as a persuasive technique than a piece of evidence, because they use that music to build excitement and make you feel excited while you're watching these trailers. But I like the way you think. I like the way you think, Conan. Good. And there's something that I didn't even think about. The next thing is the date. So yes, they'll always post the release date of the movie as evidence, or evidence of when it's coming out, where you can go and see it. So very good. Very true. If you do not know the day, you'll be like, oh, it's going to be a long time. If it's 2 or 3 more days after publishing, they will go quick. You have to watch it quick. Very true, yes. So I would say that the release date, yes, it's evidence. It's telling you a fact when the movie will be released. But it can also be used as a persuasive technique to get people excited. Well, we've got to go and see it as soon as it comes out. We know when we're going to go to the movies to watch it. So very good, Conan. I like how you're thinking. I like how you're thinking. Okay. So the next thing I want to talk about, or to finish up this point, is being able to identify the use of evidence in pieces of persuasive writing. That is a very important skill to develop. because if you can tell when they're presenting you with evidence, you could, or for one, you'll be able to learn different ways to include evidence in your own writing. And two, it will allow you to work out just how effective that evidence was. Because if you can see the evidence and then you find out, I don't know, for example, the evidence that they use on an advertisement for a brand new car. If you see that they're using lots of evidence in their ad campaigns, then you'll see, you'll be able to work out just how effective it is, because if they're selling lots of cars, obviously what they're saying about them is very effective. It's working. But if they're not selling so many cars, then maybe that evidence wasn't the best idea and they should have done the ad in a different way. So that's a valuable skill to have, to be able to determine, to be able to, first of all, identify the evidence, and second, work out just how effective it is. Okay. We went on a bit of a journey with that point, but we got there. Well done, guys. Do we all understand the importance of identifying? That's it. Also, the location of the ad wouldn't so much be evidence, but putting it there would actually be a persuasive technique, because those ads are very expensive to place and they put them in a place where lots of people can see them. So something like that would be a persuasive technique, because it would be where there's lots of people going to be able to see it. Or to be honest, it might be even more classified as an identifying your audience technique. Because if you know a large part of your audience are going to walk past that billboard and see it, then a lot of your audience, you can attract them to come and see the movie. Good thinking. So next I want to talk about incorporating evidence into your writing, or using evidence in your persuasive writing. So we can't just go and just grab a bit of evidence and then just copy paste it into our writing. One, that's plagiarism, and two, it's poor planning. So we want to be really careful, and we want to plan really well how we're going to use our evidence. So can we think of a few different reasons why, a few different ways that we could plan to use our evidence well? Or just some good strategies for using our evidence well. What can we do to use our evidence? So I'll start us off. Oh no, now Stella's turned into Kevin. So the first thing is we can plan, that should have an L in it. Plan our writing. So oh, not this, Kevin. Don't start. You've been behaving well this lesson, and you go and do this. So some of the things that we can Actually, so just to pause and go back to the previous point, Conan just sent me sent in an interesting message. They can do things like, well, build a fandom first. So make something popular, maybe by making it a video game, or, you know, maybe start off as a band or do something that way. And then when you get popular, doing your initial thing, you can branch out and make a movie, and then you already have a big audience built in that will just go and see your movie. So that can be some good evidence, because if something gets popular enough, they will make a movie about it. Well done, Conan. I see some kind of advertising executive job in your future. I know, you just did a little he did a big ah. So the first thing we can do, back on track, we can plan our writing. So we can write our, so instead of just going straight in and writing your paragraph, so just going to write, you can actually make a plan about it. So you can do something like, well, very similar to the way that I showed you guys. That was my debaters. I showed them how to write a teal paragraph, where I took all of the parts that we needed to write. So in this case, it would be position, reason, evidence, and then if I set it up like this, I can actually keep notes while I'm writing. So I can write, okay, so position, blah, 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 blah. Here's my position. What's a reason that I think of? Might do a brainstorm or some other activity to get some ideas. Pick a reason, blah, 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 blah. I know, my writing is beautiful. You don't have to tell me. So, and then when it comes to evidence, I could make a list. I do know what clickbait is, yes. Far too much of it on the internet these days. So, evidence, I could keep a list. So maybe when I did a Google search, I could say Google search, blah, 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 blah. There's my topic. And then I could say, okay, so I found this good news article, blah, 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 blah. There's the news article. I found this good, found this interesting YouTube video, blah, 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 blah. There's the link. Then I can get this list of evidence, and then I can go through the evidence, pick which one I think is going to help prove my point the best. And then I would go back, and then once I had picked my evidence, I would then go on and write my evidence into the article. So by planning it out in that order, and then once you'd done that, you'd remove all your headings and just combine it all to make a nice, neat little argument. So planning your evidence can be a good way to use it effectively. Any questions about that? Good. So another thing to do is make sure the evidence is relevant. So the worst thing we can do is present a bad bit of evidence when it comes to persuasive writing, I should say. The worst thing we can do is have a brilliant position, a really well thought out argument, but then our evidence is just bad. Because as soon as that happens, we just lose all credibility. We might get a chance to try and redeem ourselves later on in our piece of writing, but for the meantime, we're just going to lose all credibility. So make sure that the evidence is relevant. We can, as well, make sure evidence is credible. Because as I like to say, if I'm talking to you about physics, I think you'll believe my argument a lot more if I quote Dr. Albert Einstein than if I just quote my mate John from down the street. So make sure that your evidence is credible. Make sure the person or organization it comes from is trustworthy and believable. And finally, state your evidence clearly. So don't make it overly complicated. So try and list your evidence as simply as possible. So if they use lots of like big fancy words that you don't think your audience will understand, simplify it for them, so that anyone that reads your writing is going to understand what you're talking about and not be more confused. Any questions about that? Okay, good. So no, it is not. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk to you about, or the last two things I want to talk to you about, is the impact of your evidence So the impact of your evidence. So that just means how much more it makes your writing credible to your audience. So if you use strong evidence, which we'll talk about next, so if you use strong evidence, then your arguments are going to be a lot more believable to your audience. So strong evidence equals a strong case. So yeah, if you use good solid evidence, you're going to present a good solid case. Because yeah, it's just that word that I'm not going to say because it'll send Kevin crazy. But again, it comes back to that term. So if your evidence is credible and strong, you will increase the chance that your readers will be persuaded by your argument. And finally, to work out or to evaluate the strength of your evidence. Why are you screaming, Kevin? On camera, you look very, very calm for somebody that's screaming their head off in the message box. So finally, to evaluate the strength of your evidence, we want to, again, just make sure that it is 3 things. And we've already talked about these 3 things. And now now Conan's gone crazy with laughter. So our evidence should be clear, relevant, and come from a credible source. So, Kevin, if you could stop screaming for a moment, can you tell me, what do I mean by your evidence should be clear? What do I mean when I say your evidence should be clear? Bo, do you want to have a go at answering? Oh, Kevin?
If your evidence should be clear, you should set clearly, and that is truly, and you use your voice control so that the opponents will think that you like
I think you've switched over to debate there. We're talking about persuasive writing. So why should your evidence be clear?
because you will persuade the other people so that your evidence should be clear.
So your evidence should be clear so it's understandable. People need to understand it. Next, Bo, what do I mean when I say my evidence should be relevant? It should be on topic. So our evidence should be on the topic that we're arguing about, needs to support our case. And finally, somebody chime in. What do I mean when I say your evidence should come from a credible source? Burn. So what do I mean when I say your evidence should come from a credible source? People need to be able to trust your evidence, or they need to trust the place your evidence came from. Okay, so good work today, guys. I'll post your homework for today's lesson in the how do you say it, in the Zalo group. And I'll see you all on, were you just doing the Mulaga dance? Stella? Were you just doing that dance from TikTok? I'm going crazy, don't mind me. So, yeah, I'll post your homework in the Zalo group. Good work, everybody. I'll see you on Friday.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. It's a social media app, Conan. Don't download it.
I never know what is TikTok is. I only just walk now.
It's a silly app where silly people go and do silly dances. Hello, everybody. How are we today? Okay. So, our last lesson, we were talking about. Oop. Okay. So, how many people? Excellent. All right, I'm just going to send a quick message to the Zalo group, guys. Okay, so our last lesson, we were talking about. Oh, terrific. So our last lesson, we were talking about